Suns fans, you know what time it is in the PHX.
Empire of the Suns.
Phoenix Suns.
Empire of the Suns.
The Empire of the Suns podcast is brought to you by Sonic. Drive to your nearest Sonic location and don't forget to order your half-price drink or slush anytime in the Sonic app.
Hello there, and welcome to the Empire of the Suns podcast. My name is Kellan Olson, not joined by Kevin Zimmerman. Kevin taking on one of life's greatest adventures, welcoming new life into this world. He's done it yet again. Who could have seen it coming? Incredible stuff for him. So he's going to be away for a bit. I've got to get guests to fill in at a pretty important time. The trade deadline has passed. It's 4 o'clock on Thursday. Who better to come join me than Sam Cooper of the Timeline podcast? Mike and Sam have been doing tremendous work. Both have been on the pod before, I believe. And Sam, I'm getting first dibs here. Now, you and Mike would have recorded right after the deadline if you could. Mike's got some work. So your first fresh thoughts on the deal in audio form. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Kellan. First of all, thanks for bringing me on. Shout out to Kevin. Congratulations to him on welcoming new life into this world, like you're saying. But Kellan, we have to welcome new life onto the Phoenix Suns roster, and that is what we're doing today. And look, first thoughts, it was a little anticlimactic. Never a dull moment with this team in the sense that, like, all of the narratives that we can think about, how is this going to affect the summer? We're going to have a very, very interesting summer ahead of us, and I think that's really the bulk of what you and I are going to be talking about here for this podcast. My initial reaction to the overall landscape is that I said on Twitter the other day, it's not the worst thing in the world for Matt Ishbia and for this organization collectively to have to spend a couple of months just sort of sitting in the corner and thinking about what they've done. And that's effectively the situation we've put ourselves in now. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I think, like, the product on the court and the body language and all of that stuff is just going to be something interesting to track for the next 2 months of the season.
Yeah, it's important for you to bring that up because I think that I could go on a rambly 7-minute catch up with everyone in terms of how this week unfolded. But essentially what you need to know, or what we need to cover as context before we get into the conversation, is that the Suns' continual pursuit of Jimmy Butler met a serious impasse. And I spoke on a level of confidence on this podcast and in other mediums over the last 6 weeks that the Suns are no dummies. I'm not saying they're dummies because they didn't get Jimmy Butler now, but they're no dummies. They're doing all this because they know they can get off Bradley Beal, and they know there's a team that Bradley Beal could go to. But ultimately, no sort of deal came together. There were those signs, Sam, that we saw earlier in the week where it's like, ooh, the Kuzma deal got done. That was like one of the 4 to 5 teamers. There was like a mega Fox deal that could have gotten done. You and Mike have joked, and I've joked about just like Matt Tellum's low-key importance in this, like the multi-trade maestro, and they just did a 2-team deal, and that was it. We should say at the start, the Suns did make a trade. They trade Jusuf Nurkic, a 2026 first-rounder, to Charlotte. They get back Cody Martin, Vasilij Micic, and a 2026
new life I was alluding to.
Second-round pick. That is it indeed. But that is not the headliner. We're going to get through all of the other noise. So Jimmy Butler instead goes to the Golden State Warriors. It's strange, Sam. I thought he wouldn't sign with the Golden State Warriors. I thought that they wouldn't have any interest in him. All this leverage play at hand. Butler immediately agrees to a new extension as soon as the deal is brokered. It's Andrew Wiggins and salary, essentially, and a first-round pick, and that's it. So the price was rather low on Butler, but the Suns couldn't meet it. And then it was the point of, like, how could they pivot once they weren't able to get a Beal deal done? Apparently, per John Gambaduro's reporting, it got to the extent that they were exploring a 3-team deal that would send Kevin Durant to the Warriors, Jimmy Butler to Phoenix, and then, of course, like Wiggins and whatever to Miami to get the deal done. Apparently, this got to the point where Durant himself sort of shot it down, and you can imagine how that impacted the Warriors' interest in it once they heard that Durant was not interested in it.
That was the deal. Just to be clear, that also included Kuminga coming to Phoenix as part of it. I want to make sure I'm right there before I speak on it.
Yeah, Gambo on the Bickley and Murata show this morning sort of outlined what he saw as like parts of the deal. It was like picks and Kuminga and Butler, essentially, is what he shared on the radio this morning. And I think that this was a really strange turn because it was another way for the Suns to look towards the future somewhat, Sam. But the concerning part is that a lot of that pie chart of value was Jimmy Butler, a star in his mid-30s, when it seems like they should look towards the future. And what we'll get to later is that it appears now they are possibly going to be looking to the future. But what do you think about the deal that almost was, that I would say broke Twitter, but we're coming off Luka to the Lakers, so it would have been more of a secondary crack, if anything?
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I mean, look, you can see the difference in Phoenix's approach versus, to bring up that Luka deal, Nico Harrison's approach, because Luka was completely blindsided by that deal. Kevin, who does not have a no trade clause like Bradley Beal does, he actually had the opportunity to, whether it was through Golden State, kind of like leaking, part of that to him or to his agent, I'm not sure, but he had the opportunity to shoot that deal down, and the Suns honored that, respected that wish. So I think that's an important detail in there. What do I think about it from a value proposition for the Suns? It was never especially attractive to me. I mean, I think it's kind of like a sign of maybe the organization feeling a little bit rudderless and a little bit trapped between these two extremes of, are they all in? Are they all out? That's kind of how we've felt about them for the past couple of months. We've never exactly known if they want to completely go for this and dig the hole all the way, or if they're finally thinking about like how heavily they want to go into this rebuilding stage. And does that mean they're willing to trade KD, not only KD, but could Book be next, and all of these other questions. So, I think it was a big deal to even see that the Suns were not just taking calls on Kevin Durant over the past week, but that they were getting into deeper rounds of negotiations on those on those potential KD deals. Right. I think now as we approach the offseason, the likelihood that the Suns trade Kevin Durant has gone from about, I would say maybe, arbitrary numbers here, but 10% to 90% in the past 2 weeks. It sort of does feel like they are sleepwalking into that era of Suns basketball being officially over.
It's crazy that they still have like a season to play after this, right? Like this very much felt like the end of the season almost happening, and yet they are trying to not only get in the play-in, secure a play-in spot, secure a playoff spot. All of that stuff is for later, though, because to your point, there's this phenomenon that we deal with as people who are not source reporting people, and like looking at all those reports emerge, there was just so much noise on this KD to the Warriors stuff that it became difficult to ignore, much like the Beal and Butler stuff really picking up 6 weeks ago. And then it just seemed like a legitimate possibility, to your point, that not so much that Kevin Durant was going to the Warriors, but the Suns were just going to trade Kevin Durant. It just didn't seem feasible with how much of a win now attitude seemed to be that they were in. And then after the Jimmy Butler deal happens, it's like, okay, there's no longer a KD structure around that. Do they trade Kevin Durant? And then we're just kind of waiting here for the next day and change, or actually less than a day, I should say, from last night until this afternoon to see like, okay, they say, and the reports say, like they're not moving Kevin Durant. There's no inclination that they will. But is some team going to include like this mega deal to them that they just have to accept? Is that going to come in? It never did. And now you're in this incredibly awkward situation, and maybe incredibly is a bit of a stretch, but you're in an awkward situation now where Brad has been shopped 4 weeks. Kevin was just shopped for the last week. That is 2 of your 3 most expensive, best players, however you want to phrase them as, and now you've got to go through a season still. Ramona Shelburne reporting today that the vibes have become toxic at times in the locker room. That's the type of thing where like we could react to that sort of statement on its own, Sam, but like we've watched this team on the basketball court, like we just saw them get smoked by OKC by 35. So like we kind of have an idea of watching what we've seen on the floor and how it can indicate that things are not really working behind the scenes either. But I am curious to see what direction this turns over the next 30 games, the toughest schedule remaining in the league. If they play better, I know I'm not going to sit here and rule out the possibility. I certainly don't think it's going to happen. But if they play better, do they rethink what they're probably thinking right now, which is we're going to trade Durant? It still feels like a lot is up in the air, even though we're pretty certain about what the basketball we're going to see over the next 2 months.
Yeah, well, first of all, a couple things there. Just on the Ramona Shelburne report, I think toxic can mean a couple of different things. And, obviously she has an incentive to report on any kind of controversy going on within the locker room, it drives readership and clicks and all that. But, what does toxic mean? Because I saw a Suns team last night that as they were being blown out by 35 plus by the Oklahoma City Thunder, you have shots over, and periodically over the past couple of years, we've seen this, but shots to the bench of guys who look like they're pretty friendly with each other, right? And they're having fun and they're laughing. And I think this is some of the stuff, speaking as a fan myself, I know you're in a bit of a different situation, but this tends to be the stuff when I speak with other fans that enrages people the most, is the insinuation that, the guys, especially guys on the league's biggest payroll, just have never brought consistently that competitive spirit this entire season. I would argue they had it in the first 10 games. That's when they really looked like a team that was not only winning games, but they were winning a lot of close games. They were taking a lot of threes. They looked like a team that had a fundamental faith in not only themselves, but also in Coach Bud as like this force that essentially could, instill a certain system into them and allow them to play championship basketball. And we haven't seen any of that competitive spirit in quite some time. So again, like what does toxic mean? I think for the Suns, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a Draymond Green-esque character in this locker room who's going to punch one of his teammates in the face in practice. I just don't think there are any characters like that on this team. Although maybe it was a good thing that they got rid of Nurkic. But it's more likely to mean that we just continue to see really, really disengaged basketball for the next 2 months. And to that point, I would just say, like, is that really all that different from what we've already been seeing? Like, how much worse? Right. How much worse could it truly get? And don't get me wrong. Strength of schedule is the hardest in the league out of any team for them coming up. I think there's a chance that this gets really, really ugly. But, I would just argue that they were already trending that way for quite a while.
I agree totally. And it feels like the move that they made today, which we'll get to in a little bit, was much more about future flexibility or just having two players they could do more with than Nurkic, and the price of giving up a first-round pick for that was worthwhile to them. To go back to Kevin and just the decisions now that the front office have to make, I basically see 3 timelines, and all of them involve Durant getting traded. It's just something that Kevin and I have elaborated on, Kevin Zimmerman and I have elaborated on for far too long now on this podcast. Is like, this just doesn't work. This allotment of the team doesn't work. And there's essentially 3 ways you can go about trading him. 1, you can trade him in the Jimmy Butler 3-team kind of style where you're trading for some value now and some value for the future. There's number 2, which is Durant just for a bunch of young players and a bunch of picks, and you sort of start to replenish that barren part of your asset and like youth pool, if we're being honest. And then 3 is you look at option 1, you look at option 2, and you don't see a path to contending within the next 3 to 5 years. Devin Booker is on a deal that I believe has 3 more years left after this year. If I pull it up right now, that's around where he's going to expire. I believe the summer of 2029 is when his deal is going to run out. 28, excuse me. So he's got 3 more years left after this year on his deal. And you could come to the conclusion, I'm not saying this is how I feel, but you could come to the conclusion that that is not enough time for you to get there, and then you're re-signing Booker when he is age 32. Now, this is the face of the franchise, just became the leading scorer. I think they should do everything they can to keep him, and it would be a mistake to move him. But I do think that there is some rational thinking to looking at option 1, looking at option 2, and the only way option 2 works and you get younger and you get more athletic around Booker is I think you'll be a good team, but can you be a great team that contends? You're going to have to hit on draft picks. James Jones has done in the past. We'll see, but that could lead to option. Difficult. It would be tough, and it would lead you to option 3, which is just trading both guys, blowing it up entirely right now and going through a couple of really tough years in order to rebuild all of your decisions. But overarching all of this, and the biggest question now after we spent, you and Mike spent like a couple years being like, oh man, I really love the year DeAnthony Melton's had. This 6-week stretch for Josh Jackson's been incredible. The overarching thing we always talked about on our pod, and you guys did too, how much longer is Book okay with this? How much longer is he okay with 20 wins before he asks out? And now 5 years later, here we are again with like, 1, is he okay with Durant getting traded? And if he is okay with Durant getting traded, is he okay with knowing next year the Suns would not have a roster capable to compete for a championship? Because this is a guy that is in his prime right now, and the next contract he signs is likely going to be one in which he is fading out of his prime or is out of his prime entirely. And if he says no to one of those 2 questions, Sam, we got an even more eventful summer on our hands, I think.
Of course. Yeah. And I really think it can go in any way, but this is the advantage, if there is any advantage, of kind of this deadline of nothingness that, all sorts of key players in the organization. I don't just mean players. I mean the front office executives as well. Everyone gets to learn something. Everyone gets to sit and reflect, us as analysts as well. I think Matt Ishbia can come out of this and sort of like watch some bad basketball be played, some disinterested basketball be played, and maybe take away the lesson that he got too big for his britches, and it's time to slowly bring the team back to normality. On the player side, Devin gets to think about, well, what does my future look like? And, do I believe still in the ability for this team to compete? I would be interested to know. This is not anything I have information about, but if there were any conversations with Book about that Jimmy Butler for KD swap and kind of, what his level of involvement would be, in those talks and how much of it really is wrapped around trying to appease him for the future. Because I 100% agree with you, Kellan. If you just trade KD for pure picks, you trade him to Houston just to get your picks back, and I don't even know what you could get at this point. Last year, we were talking about doing that deal. They could have gotten Şengün and Amon Thompson, and it is certainly not. That would not be the
You're
move
getting like
anymore.
Fred VanVleet's expiring and like Jabari Smith to have the right to pay Jabari Smith, basically. Like that's probably what you're getting now if it's around the picks.
Yeah, if you're getting just those picks, unless Ryan Dunn becomes Kawhi Leonard next year, which I would say there's a 1% chance of happening. Maybe
non-zero.
Not a 0% chance, but it's quite unlikely that you can really steer this team back to true contention, especially with, the Lakers have Luka Doncic now. The Spurs have Wemby and Fox. Like, the conference is getting so much better so quickly. It really feels like a tall order. So, yeah, I would have a mature conversation with Book, ask what he wants, and then do your best to facilitate and go from there. But none of that changes the fact of what we already know, Kellan, which is that this iteration of the team, for many different reasons, it's no one player's fault, but for many different reasons does not fit. And that starts with trading Kevin Durant. Maybe you can see in the summer if you can still trade Bradley Beal. I have a feeling you're going to run into the same roadblocks and obstacles.
And yet there is still a certain amount of tangible belief in what they want to see out of the team the rest of the year, because why wouldn't you trade Tyus Jones? Because when the trade broke,
Absolutely.
I was like, 3 point guards. Okay, could you start Monte Morris or not start a point guard? Because, let's face it, Sam, they're basically not starting a point guard right now because Tyus Jones is hardly on the ball anyway. And if they are starting a point guard, it's been Devin Booker for the last 2 months.
He's a 5'10" small forward is the way that Tyus Jones
the 3-and-D
right
wing that will revolutionize the league is 5'11" Tyus Jones. Yeah, it's been rough to watch him go through that transition really well. That's the thing, is you're just watching a guy get misused horribly with what he does well, and yet he's still kind of been playing well, at least offensively. I know defensively, it's been an uphill battle. I loved how it took until 42 points for Shea last night, by the way, to be let's send a second guy over there. Let's hedge a bit. Let's get up on
my theory about that was it was Bud's last ditch effort to say, please give me something else here, so that we don't need to do this anymore. Please get this guy out of here.
Royce O'Neal's having a great year. He's 31. Grayson's having another good year after getting past his injuries. He's 29, and you never know the timing on value for those guys. So if you were truly looking towards the future, I think there would have been a lot more activity here. You look at what Atlanta did. Atlanta was okay, well, crap, Jalen Johnson's out for the year. Let's just get under the tax and trade everything. They trade DeAndre Hunter and stuff. There was nothing like that for Phoenix. But to go back to the 3 timelines and a couple of points that I have there and to get back there, point 1 is interesting because to your observation, that could be what Devin Booker wants, right? It's I'm cool with trading Kevin, but let's get some pieces for right now. I want to be in the playoffs still, that kind of thing. That's when the decision comes on okay, how badly do we want to keep Book? And in my opinion, I think they should want to keep him in that timeline. So if it's even getting 60% now and 40% future assets in a trade instead of the 100 you would get in timeline 2, I still think 1, having Booker is more valuable. That's where people will disagree, I'm sure. But I think it's more valuable. And then 2 is, how do you look at the West to what you were saying and doing it? I'm going to go team by team here, saying Oklahoma City, Memphis, Houston, they're going nowhere in the next couple of years. They're going to be around for sure. Isn't it crazy that Nikola Jokic is only 29? Isn't that insane?
Yeah, he's retiring in 2 years to go play with his horses.
Yeah,
I have no faith that Jokic has another 7-8 years in this league, but who knows? I could be wrong.
That's such a good
could
theory.
Be wrong.
He just retires actually in his prime, like the first athlete to actually retire in their prime that like isn't suffering from concussions in the NFL or whatever. They're not going anywhere.
I think would have to bump him up a couple of tiers in the all-time rankings if he does that, just out of pure respect.
It would be a king move. There's no doubt about it. Speaking of kings, the Lakers, they got Luka, so they're not going anywhere anytime soon anymore. The Clippers are the team that's going to drop off. Minnesota has a guy named Anthony Edwards. Dallas probably drops off in a couple of years. Sacramento probably. I don't know what's going on over there. Golden State, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, is around, but after that, it's probably going to get ugly for them too. The Spurs are obviously coming. There is some Portland stuff kind of happening. They're playing decent basketball lately, Sam. And by the way, I don't know if you remember this, if people remember this. Cole Zwicker, who used to write for The Stepien, who did brilliant draft work, he actually was my guest co-host for the last time, one of the last like major events that Kevin couldn't get to for vacation, family purposes and stuff, understandably so. He guest hosted with me in like 2019, Sam, and now he's a scout on the Rockets along with a couple of other Stepien people. And then there's another Stepien person working for OKC, and there's another Stepien person working for Memphis. It's kind of just like the boys might be cooking right now, is what I'm saying. And Portland, of course, has Mike Schmitz, former Draft Express Valley of the Sun.
What I will say, the boys are cooking until all of those franchises ultimately arrive at a point where the expectations are real, and it's not just about pure asset collection anymore. So I will watch all of those teams, intently. In the playoffs this year, and we'll see how all of them perform. But like we saw the Suns go through this transition too. It's really easy at the beginning when you're first winning a lot of games, and then you have to start making the difficult salary decisions. That's where it can trip you up.
That has been maybe my biggest observation for Suns fans, is that you are now the biggest fans of whoever plays OKC and Houston in the first and the second round, because you're hoping that those teams fall flat on expectations, just like the Suns did the year before with Durant. And you just hope that that is enough to motivate their front office to be like, well, we sure like our core, but it looks like we can't get done the postseason. Let's go get Kevin Durant. That's what you should be rooting for. But Portland certainly trending up. Utah, whenever they decide to implement their picks and stuff, are there. And then New Orleans is what it is. But I just named 8 or 9 teams, Sam, that really aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and maybe are only going to get better over the next couple of years. So you look at the motivation to win at least for the next year, 2, 3 years. I just don't really see it with what you have and what other teams sort of have. Is there anything else like really big picture you want to hit on, Sam, before we get to this Nurkic deal and just sort of the more minor stuff kind of going on, second apron things, wiggling, stuff of that nature?
A couple things, I suppose. I mean, like, I don't generally agree with the premise that, like, and I agree with you, the Western Conference is only getting better, but I don't generally agree with this premise that it's so hard we shouldn't try. And I have an inkling that Matt Ishbia does not agree with that premise either, especially as, remember, 2027, Phoenix is hosting the All-Star game. I don't think Matt Ishbia is interested in having a 23-59 Suns team that year that is hosting that game. I think he's like, no matter what, I think that is maybe your best evidence to point at they're going to try and balance the return that they can get for KD between something for the future and something for now, something that can keep them competitive. I also just wanted to ask you a question, because about 5 minutes before we started recording here, I don't know if you saw Chris Haynes' tweet that one of the last minute teams to make a call for Kevin Durant, the Minnesota Timberwolves. Oh,
I love a good mystery team, Sam, don't you?
Wanted to get your reaction on that. A mystery
bidder has emerged. Gambo later reporting during the podcast here, Sam, that like half the league reached out on Durant. And I think,
my God, I didn't see that.
And I think that's what you're dealing with this summer, and why another good point to make before we stray off a bit is that Booker is going to have amazing trade, even if you decide that like you would consider trading him this summer. Like, his value isn't really going anywhere for the next year or two, in my opinion. Like, yes, there are longer years left on his deal, but like the going rate for unprotected first and young players, like that really isn't going to go anywhere in that direction. Durant is the other one here for sure, where you look to sign him to an extension this year. You get the 2-year extension deal done regardless of if he's staying or not. That increases it to 3 years left on his deal. And so like that acquiring team or you yourself have him for longer. With that in mind, his like trade value is never going to be higher. So you're just hoping, and I hate to kind of say it this way, but you're just kind of hoping for him to stay healthy for the rest of the season and go into the summer having all of your options completely open to you. And that's where you're going to kind of go around and you're going to be able to find the team that gives you what you want, Sam, because like Gambo mentioned, half the league called. So you're going to be able to, whatever of those 3 timelines you pick, you're going to be able to find a team that gives you sort of more or less what you want, and you're going to be able to go into open bidding. But the thing that did not happen, Sam, that I would be worried about here if I was a Suns fan is this was not Kevin Durant asking for a trade. This was something that, according to Shams, surprised Kevin, and he did not think that he would be in trade talks this week. High raising my hand. I was surprised too. What if he starts doing the thing everyone was worried about Luka doing this summer, which is saying, like, I just want to go to Houston, that's it, and not even Houston, that's the best case scenario. Like, what if he says, like, I just want to go to New York, I just want to go to the Lakers, I just want to play with Luka and LeBron, that's all I want to do, and then you're stuck taking that deal, and that sort of thing can spiral on you quickly, for sure.
Yeah, well, that was my first thought, with all of the lack of trade breaking at the time, was that now he's going to go into the summer and try and force his own destiny, as is his right. We're also seeing in the current CBA environment, though, that, players aren't always guaranteed to be able to force their own destiny, a.k.a. hello, Jimmy Butler. So, that could happen to KD too. But yeah, I absolutely think that there's a strong possibility of that happening, Kellan, that KD goes into the summer and he says, I will not sign an extension with any team except X team. I don't know exactly who it would be at this stage, but yeah, the threat is definitely there. And that's why Booker has about 8 times more trade value than KD probably has at this point. It would just be a really, really difficult bullet for the fan base and the organization to bite.
And a crazy part of this that we're going to be able to see more on, I assume, this summer is that he has the Netflix doc following him around this year, as Dave McMenamin from ESPN just pointed out. So the footage from this week and just how everything sort of escalated, spiraled, however you want to put it exactly, is going to be interesting. Bradley Beal's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? We should talk about him briefly, Sam. Like, you just can't move him, right?
I suppose. You should keep trying. Credit to Brad, because he is one of 2 players with a contractually obliged ability to say no. And he exercised that, as is his right. And I think he's done a really good job handling the transition to the bench. Again, has not been a diva in the locker room. When Ramona Shelburne is talking about it being toxic, it's like, I view toxic as if Bradley Beal was going around swinging on Damian Lee in the locker room. That's not what's happening, right?
No, I don't think so.
Different. It's a different type of toxic. It's less toxic to me, and it's more just apathetic. Just kind of a bunch of guys who are happy to be in the desert climate, happy to be experiencing 70 and sunny every day and collecting their checks, but they're not really about winning basketball anymore. That's my worry. But yeah, I'm not sure that Bradley Beal's going anywhere anytime soon. And again, Matt Ishbia, what have we learned? Number 1, don't swing it around too heavily when you burst through the door. Number 2, don't trade for a player with a no trade clause unless that player is, whatever next generation's version is of LeBron James. Maybe Victor Wembanyama in 5 years. Okay, that's a different situation. But otherwise, we do not trade for players with no trade clauses. I will always be traumatized. I will be, knock on wood, if I'm still living, if I'm 95 years old one day talking to my great-grandchildren, Kellan Olson, I will tell them, do not trade for a player with a no trade clause. Don't do it.
Well,
don't do it. It'll set you back for years.
Sam, get ready to talk about this more, because the 2 guaranteed news cycles we have this summer is KD trade watch, but then before that is LeBron James trade watch, which will, of course, include like Phoenix trying to go after him and his no trade clause as well. So get ready for that part of your life, whether you like it or not. Good, sir. What was your first reaction when you saw this trade? The Nurkic deal, again, it's Nurkic in the 2026 first rounder. That will likely be in the 20s. It is the worst pick among Washington, Memphis, and Orlando. You'd guess Memphis and Orlando are a certified playoff team next season. That would put the pick then. The ability to trade that pick, of course, was unlocked by the 3-for-1 deal that they did, and then they received Cody Martin, who is under contract this year and next year, fully non-guaranteed next year. Micic as well is in the same position with a team option for next year, and then the second round pick as well. So what was your first reaction here? Was it the players or more so like the underlying sort of motivation behind this trade, perhaps?
Well, I didn't have all the information coming in, right? So my very first reaction, seeing like the first tweet before the rest of it came in, I didn't realize Cody Martin was non-guaranteed next year. So my first thought was, oh, Cody Martin, that's a James Jones wing. He can play. He does have an abdomen injury right now that he'll probably be nursing for the next few weeks, if I had to guess. But he can come back and play 15 minutes a night. That's fine. Once I realized that, oh, he's also non-guaranteed for next year, it started to make a lot more sense that this was just a pure salary dump. Although it could be good to have him in the rotation, be able to evaluate him. Maybe you bring him into next year. Maybe he's worth something next year. That is an option they could take. But the more I thought about this trade, the other thing, by the way, at first I was like, oh, they got a second-round pick from Charlotte. That could be the 32nd pick. And then I realized, oh, it's not the Charlotte pick. It's, who is it from, Denver or
the worst
Golden
out
State?
of Denver and Golden State. So again, likely will be in the high 40s, low 50s. I think Gerald put it as, and I agree with him.
Yeah, probably will be the 50th pick. So at first I'm thinking, you get rid of a late first round pick and you pick up the 32nd pick in that same draft. That's fine. Nope. Instead, they are getting back a pick that they were already in possession of and traded in the Nick Richards deal. That's probably closer to 50th, which is not great. So we have to view this as purely a salary dump. I do think, though, it's interesting if they really can get out of the second apron. And it seems like now, I know some people have to run the numbers, but it seems like there is a pathway there. Not that they will do it.
There is,
but
for
there's
sure.
a pathway there.
There absolutely is, and it's going to shout out to our Australian correspondent, David, 4 Point Play, friend of your guys' pod as well. The cap is going up a lot next year and a lot next year and a lot the year after that. So I think even if you wanted to keep one of those two guys, there's still maneuverability there to where they could duck under it anyway. Now, for me, Sam, this trade is about what you do with what you got. And what I mean by that is, if you do duck under the second apron, what are the benefits from that and what are you getting out of that? The picks being frozen, not being frozen is a big part of this, of course, and that's something that they need to look to achieve. But also, it opens up your maneuverability with trades. It's like, okay, what are you getting done?
Aggregating contracts.
What are you getting?
Huge.
Yeah, what are you getting done with aggregating? Are you able to combine two lesser salaries for a guy on a bigger, longer deal that you would want both now and in the future? To your point on if Booker wants to win now, could you get pieces like that you need to build around him that you wouldn't have now, which is obviously...
Can I throw something at you right
Sure.
now? The first thing I did, I was like, well, okay, combine, what contracts do the Suns have still next year? Because you'll notice they didn't trade Grayson Allen. Grayson Allen signed to a long-term deal. I think they could have gotten a first-round pick potentially for him today if they were interested in shopping, and they're clearly not competing for the second half of this season. If you add Royce O'Neal and Grayson Allen together, whose salary does that add up to? Kellan Olson, Draymond Green, Matt Ishbia's preferred, perhaps, project, Draymond Green.
Devin Booker's fellow Michigan brethren right there.
Another Michigan product. And I think, if you were interested, let's just say, in driving Kevin Durant out of Phoenix, I cannot think of a better way to do it than trading for Draymond Green. I'm sorry. I have to get my jokes off today too.
No, that was worth the delivery as well, and not the type of delivery that Draymond Green is used to giving either. Okay. Yeah. So, first apron, second apron, all that stuff. I think it matters what you get out of this. So, here's the thing, Sam. I like Cody Martin. I think he's a good basketball player. He's been like a fake trade target of mine, if you want to call it that, for over a year now. Sam, you're not going to believe this watching the game, and I don't need to tell you this, but the Suns now have a second player who can stop dribble penetration. Isn't that unbelievable? They now have two instead of just one. They certainly have guys that are more capable of doing so. I think that a lot of guys on their team are capable of stopping dribble penetration, but going back to last year and especially this year, it's been the number one problem for them defensively. Cody Martin can do that. He is, as Kevin Pelton pointed out, a rare stocks guy where he's great about steals, great about blocks. I was watching through some of the tape and highlights today. Very good with chase down blocks, very good at staying engaged in a possession. A lot of the steals that I was seeing were plays where he is actively dancing between lanes that he's supposed to be in and being attentive and being able to recover or make a play on the ball with either a swipe or a swat. It was refreshing to see that, and I'm looking forward to seeing him play for the team. The downside here is that in the Suns finals run year, to give it context here on how long ago this was, he shot 39% from three and was like, okay, like he's starting to figure out something with his shooting. The next 2 years were pretty injury riddled for him. He didn't shoot that well. And then this year he has not shot well either at all. So you're talking about another very good defensive player, smart, knows what to do with the ball, very good with his assist to usage ratio is a fun little stat for guys like him where he barely shoots, but he does well to provide the ball in those circumstances when he doesn't really have it too often. But you're throwing everything in your room, Sam, when you see Ryan Dunn continue to ride the bench right now, because you want to see the young, exciting player play 25 minutes a game right now, as you should, and he's barely playing right now. So how are they going to get minutes for Dunn and Martin, who, by the way, is 29 years old? So I would lump him into the Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, and like my best case scenario here, Sam, for like this whole trade is Martin plays, and he plays well enough to where you get him on a cheap, affordable, long-term deal like the one he had signed previously. And this is another guy where you play him, you have like a good James Jones traits kind of player, and then you can move him whenever you need to. I think that he is lumped up in there as well.
A better alternative than getting Torrey Craig for the third time to play the same role, essentially. And pejoratively, I was going to say, we have Josh Okogie at home. About Cody Martin here, but I will say, like, better ball handler, better, just more trustworthy with the ball in his hands than Josh Okogie by a long shot. I think it makes the most sense if you just steer as rapidly as you can away from the Tyus Jones experiment, because Cody Martin by himself, like, he's, if you need him to play small forward, power forward, he's another one of these wings who's 6'6". His wingspan is a few inches greater than that, but like, he's not that big. So, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But if you're no longer playing Tyus Jones as a 5'10" small forward, as we said earlier, and you can play some more point Book or even point Beal, which I'm not a huge fan of, but if you just have one of those guys at point guard, surround them with wings in conjunction with the other wings like Ryan Dunn, Royce O'Neal, Grayson Allen next to him, KD, then you might have some actual size for the next couple months.
Yeah, and you've got actual multiple perimeter defenders now to throw on, like SGA last night, to throw on the Ja Morants of the world, and that's something that you can have for a couple of years here, because Martin's only been in the league for a few years. So we'll see what comes of him. I just hope that he plays. I hope that the situation lends to itself. Like when the trade happened, again, I was like, okay, that's your third point guard, and then it's your like ninth wing, eighth wing or whatever, and you're not going to be able to play both those guys. You might not even be able to play either of them as well. So my mind instantly went to like, okay, are there more trades? And if there aren't more trades, which there weren't, this more lends towards, okay, this is just strictly a money move. So we'll see. Again, like Martin is hurt right now, so we'll see if he emerges. Briefly, the story on Micic is that he was a late second round pick 9 years ago, I believe, maybe even like 10 or 11 years ago. It was a very long time ago. And he turned into one of the best players in Europe, didn't come over for a very long time. Eventually, OKC had his draft rights. He came over. It was a very exciting marriage and proposition of how OKC plays and how Micic plays. But he really didn't emerge in OKC. Then he gets dealt to Charlotte, where he still more or less struggles. He is an out-of-this-world passer, Sam, but he really struggles defensively, really struggles with everything else that comes with a ball handler outside of dissecting defenses.
This is the sad story of a lot of European players who are former MVPs in the EuroLeague. I mean, it's like maybe they never really have the athleticism to hang in the NBA, but you remember Milos Teodosic about 6-7 years ago?
Oh yeah,
awesome playmaker, human, maybe not human highlight reel, but had some good highlights. Milos Teodosic played 2 seasons with the Clippers. Could not defend a lick. By the time he was in the NBA, it was the same story. He was already like 31 years old and just too far past his prime in order to really make an impact. I think you're basically going to see the same thing with Micic here. If I'm being honest, Kellan, I don't really expect him to play. If he does, you're going to see the passing. He can shoot the three. Don't look up his field goal percentage. Just don't do that. It's not good.
It's tough. Before we go, some draft pick stuff happened where by the Suns trading this pick, again, this was unlocked because of the 3-for-1 trade that they did. This means that they could not trade their 2025 pick, at least until they draft the guy. So we'll see what happens the day after the draft or whatever. But for now, that Cleveland pick that is going to be 29th or 30th, the Suns are going to use it. This pleases Sam greatly as someone who wants to see his team start to develop more young talent. They'll actually have 2 draft picks in the upcoming draft as well, which is exciting. But Sam, where I've disagreed with you and like where we have disagreed tangentially, still agreeing at the same time, but I'm disagreeing with the core idea. I hated the 2031 trade. I hated it at the time, and I hate it even more now because I thought the only real reason to do it at the time was to get a Jimmy deal done. They do not get a Jimmy deal done. It helps them get this trade done, I guess, in some ways. But at the same time, they're in a situation where they could have just waited on this. They could have just waited on even this sort of trade. They could have waited on, let alone the draft pick trade, where with all this noise about KD and maybe even Booker, that 2031 pick maybe even gets more value than it had 3 weeks ago. Like, teams were clamoring to trade for that thing, and you would have had a market for it in the summer if you would have just waited. But instead, it seemed like with the timing, it was reported at the time that the timing was not based on other trades, and it was like worst case scenario, we like split up these picks and we get to use them and all that stuff. It's great, but again, it's something that's a $0.50 that could turn into $1, whereas you've gotten a penny and 2 nickels, basically, is the transactional way that I have sort of broken it down. But still, there are benefits to it, Sam, that you've pointed out, where drafting guys, yay!
Absolutely. I mean, a few things on it, right? Like, I think James Jones has, if he continues to be the GM, has actually done a good job in this position with the team, finding Toumani Camara, finding Ryan Dunn, even guys like, Ty Jerome and Jalen Smith, picks that we used to pan, they turned out to be NBA players. And I think if you give him more chances in the late first round, where you're not necessarily looking for future superstars, although sometimes you might land on one, but you're just looking for like more plug and play athletes, to just give this team an infusion of energy, I think he's going to do really well with that. And, I don't mind you pushing back on me with this idea about liking that trade at all. I just think, again, what I said earlier about Ishbia probably doesn't want them tanking for the 2027 All-Star game. I think Ishbia probably doesn't want them tanking at all. And I think that probably applies to the 2031 pick as well, even if it ends up being out of spite that they're going to go 38 and 44 that year and make sure that pick is not that good. I think there's a good chance that they end up doing that. So it's something I continue to think about kind of in my analysis. And the last thing I'll say about it, I think they saw it as a leveraging tool that they could use in their negotiations. They thought it was worthwhile for them to be able to approach other teams in the past week, whether they were going to trade KD, whether they were going to trade for Jimmy. I'm just guessing here, but I think they liked this idea of, we can go either way. We don't owe you anything in our negotiations because we might be about to blow it up or we might be about to go all in. And I think, they viewed kind of making that trade for multiple picks to become more flexible in their negotiations. They viewed it as something that would aid them in that. And it backfired on them. It kind of blew up in their face, but that's life. So
it is life, and indeed, good sir. And something that Gambo pointed out on the air that I thought was very, not ominous, but just like, oh yeah, we've been here before, is Jerry Colangelo was of the mindset when he owned the team, like, I'm not interested in the lottery. Like, we're either going to be contending for a title or going to be at least trying to make the playoffs. And that is something that can land you in a certain position of mid, like it had for the Indiana Pacers for years and years. Like, they were like the prototypical example of doing that, especially like back in different eras under different head coaches and GMs and things of that nature. I think that's all we got, buddy. Thank you so much for joining me. Please plug away at your Twitter, Blue Sky, where to find your pod, all that stuff.
Dude, thank you for having me. It was fun, and honestly, it's good to talk through all this stuff. You can find me, for anyone who's interested, at S Cooper Hoops on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, or Blue Sky. I'm there too. And yeah, follow along Timeline Phoenix Suns podcast if you're interested in keeping up with our content. I would say also just to people, stay strong right now. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think there's going to be a lot of pain in the years to come. And at first, my initial reaction today was a little bit of dismay that they weren't willing to just rip the Band-Aid off. But slowly, we're going to get through it. Appreciate you, Kellan.
I believe so as well, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back next week and actually talk about basketball on the floor, because there's no more trade rumors to talk about. Surely nothing will happen in the next week where I can talk about basketball again on this podcast. Until then, goodbye, everyone.